It is Friday. Good morning, everybody. I'm Bill Hemmer live here. We could have a rockin' morning, Sandra.
We sure
morning
could. Put your seatbelts on. Another 3 hours coming up. I'm Sandra Smith. Markets set to open 30 minutes from now. The president sending a positive message on those trade talks with China as a crucial monthly jobs report shows the unemployment rate remains steady at 3.7%, following another wild ride on Wall Street.
This is a tough president, and he's got tough people working for him as a team, and this is good for America. What he's done on trade is unprecedented for any president that preceded him. They said we couldn't renegotiate NAFTA. We did. They said we couldn't renegotiate KORUS. We did. We said we couldn't get to the Chinese to the table and admit they're forcing all these things.
Peter, you got to.
Well, Peter Ducey leads our coverage on a wild Friday. Good morning, sir. How's the White House reacting on the jobs number first, Peter?
Bill, this jobs number followed a shaky few days on Wall Street where this 90-day break in the trade war between the U.S. and China was basically overlooked by traders when the Justice Department arrested a powerful Chinese telecom executive, something White House officials insist they did not know was going to happen. So regardless, the president said this morning, China talks are going very well. And he said last night, statement from China, quote, "The teams of both sides are now having smooth communications and good cooperation with each other. We are full of confidence that an agreement can be reached within the next 90 days. I agree." And President Trump is heading to Missouri momentarily. I just heard Marine One land back on the South Lawn. And so there is a strong possibility that he could react, as he often does, to the most recent developments, in this case, the jobs number. So,
all right, there could be some job changes at the White House or within the administration even. How about Nikki Haley's replacement? What are you hearing at the UN?
We're hearing that it could come any time now, Bill, and the pick is expected to be Heather Nauert, which means that soon, next couple of days, the spokeswoman for Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and Rex Tillerson, before that, formerly of Fox News herself, Heather Nauert is soon going to have to get set for a grilling by Senate Democrats at the highest profile confirmation hearing since Brett Kavanaugh's. There are a lot of questions, though, about whether or not an Ambassador Nauert would serve as a cabinet-level official like Ambassador Haley did after insisting that she serve at the cabinet level, because Haley sometimes broke with her boss, the president. So now sources that I've spoken to say there are a lot of people in the building who no longer want the UN ambassador position to be cabinet level any longer. Nauert's background, of course, is in communicating about policy instead of crafting policy. But remember, Nikki Haley didn't have a foreign policy background either.
Yeah,
she's been there
Peter.
for 2 years.
Got it. Peter Ducey, thank you from the White House, North Lawn right there. Heather Nauert, former colleague of ours, as Peter points out there. Spoke to Nikki Haley earlier in the week, and she's will most likely go into private practice, private business, probably make some money too, but all those decisions won't happen until at least the first week of January, as are the rules.
All right. Well, you mentioned we're going to have a rockin' few hours coming up. We've got this story for you as well. Former FBI Director James Comey heading to Capitol Hill this morning, sitting down behind closed doors with the House Oversight and Judiciary Committees in under 1 hour, something Comey initially was refusing to do, saying he'd prefer a public hearing. Here's what Congressman Trey Gowdy had to say about that.
Not a single one of Mueller's interviews was done in public. Not a single one of the grand jury meetings was done in public. So why Jim Comey, who the last time I was in a public hearing with him, over 100 times he said, I cannot answer in this setting. Why Mr. Transparency wants to go back to a setting where he knows he cannot answer the questions is befuddling to me.
Catherine Herridge is live on the Hill with more this morning. Catherine.
Well, thanks, Sandra, and good morning. We are expecting the former FBI director at any time now on Capitol Hill for this closed-door transcribed interview under oath. The key thing here to set expectations is that the behind closed-door interview could last several hours. In fact, well into the evening is what we expect. For Republicans, they say this really comes down to two key issues, core issues. Number one, power, and the second, accountability. Power in the sense that during the presidential campaign in 2016, the FBI ran a criminal investigation tracking the Democratic candidate Hillary Clinton and her use of a private email server. And then they closed that for the first time, and within a few weeks, they opened what's called the counterintelligence investigation. This is one of the most secret and sensitive investigations handled by the FBI, and that was into the opposing candidate, Donald Trump. Once again, let's hear from Trey Gowdy.
The FBI had a criminal investigation into a presidential candidate. And then less than a month after that ended, they launched a counterintelligence investigation into the campaign of the other major presidential candidate. So that's a lot of power that we have given an entity, and it is not too much to ask for the former head of that entity to come explain to Congress the decisions made and not made during the relevant time period.
Democrats have been highly critical of this Republican effort to bring in the former FBI director. They say it's driven by politics, and they point to the fact that the Republicans are making one last push before they lose control of the gavel starting in January. Last night, senior Democrat Eric Swalwell pointed to the fact that Democrats believe President Trump could have avoided the special counsel investigation if they had never fired James Comey in the first place. Here's Swalwell.
The president's worst instincts continue, I think, to haunt him, and will ultimately be, what exposes him criminally when Bob Mueller finishes.
Just for some context, 16 other witnesses have sat for these transcribed under oath interviews with House Republicans. But what sets this one apart is under the terms that were brokered with James Comey's legal team, there will be a transcript made publicly as early as 24 hours after the session. So you could look for that as early as over the weekend, Sandra.
All right, Catherine, we could learn a lot over the next few hours. What else are we expecting to learn today from the special counsel's investigation?
Well, we're expecting two sets of filings. They're kind of two buckets here, if you will. The first is in New York, and it has to do with the president's former personal attorney, Michael Cohen. There are going to be two filings there. Both go to the issue of sentencing and the recommendation of the special counsel based on Michael Cohen's level of cooperation. One was with the special counsel. He admitted to lying to Congress over a Moscow real estate deal in 2016. And the second has to do with sort of New York State charges, bank fraud, tax fraud, as well as election campaign finance allegations. The second is going to be here in Washington, D.C., and it has to do with the former campaign chairman, Paul Manafort. That's at a different stage in the legal action. It's at a different stage because the special counsel has claimed that Paul Manafort violated his plea agreement and has not been forthcoming. Manafort's attorneys say that's not the case. The special counsel is using strong-arm tactics to try and extract information he doesn't have, or they say doesn't even exist. So we can look for evidence in the Manafort case on these allegations that he's not cooperating and he's lied once again to investigators. The bottom line, though, today to set expectations is that we expect all of these filings to be pretty heavily redacted or blacked out because the special counsel wants to protect sensitive information about ongoing investigations. So we'll get a better outline of the ongoing investigation, but perhaps not the kind of detail that people are hoping for, Sandra.
And you'll be there to help us get through all of that. Catherine Herridge, thank you.
So for more on this, let's bring in Hugo Gurdon, editorial director, Washington Examiner. Hugo, good morning to you. I mean, there's a lot to pack into this day today. Let's talk about Comey. We'll divide that out. This really is the Republicans' last chance on this committee to get the answers they've been pursuing, Hugo.
Yeah, it certainly is, Bill. It's their last shot, and the Democrats are right. This is, they're going to be, the Democrats will shut this down in the new year when they take over the House. The Republicans actually have been divided on this. There were some, including Jim Jordan, who preferred not to have Comey and wanted to have Rod Rosenstein come in and talk about, the revelation from 12 weeks ago that he was, willing to wear a wire and, even possibly consider the 25th Amendment to get rid of President Trump. But today, what we're going to hear in the hearing, or what's going to come out, is primarily a focus on the beginnings of the Russia investigation, because there's accumulating evidence that of a lack of probity there, that the FBI and the DOJ knew even before they started this investigation that Christopher Steele and the dossier were unreliable.
Also abuse of power. Trey Gowdy's talking about that a lot. Next topic here on China. I don't know what happens on the trade deal, but I think the arrest of this Chinese businesswoman in Canada holds a lot of intrigue. Some have said it's the equivalent of Steve Jobs' son or daughter being arrested, or even Jeff Bezos' Amazon. So long as that son or daughter was the chief financial officer of Amazon or Apple, and that's the equivalent of this woman being arrested.
Yeah, that really complicates matters. The Chinese do not make a distinction between the judiciary and the executive. in China, the judiciary is a wholly owned subsidiary of the executive. And so when here in the United States, we say, you know, the administration says, look, you know, this arrest was taking place, the president didn't know about it, the Chinese find that very difficult to believe. But so it does complicate the matter, and the Chinese have complained bitterly about this arrest. They see something suspicious, and they see it as a way that the Trump administration is sort of ramping up pressure in the trade war.
To be clear, though, this woman was arrested because not of the trade war, but because of business dealings with Iran, which is in violation of this administration's policy. Last word on that, Hugo.
Yeah, exactly. She is being arrested for suspicion of sanctions busting, and it's got nothing to do with the trade war.
Thanks, Hugo. Hugo Gurdon there in Washington. Appreciate that. Well, I don't know. Feels like a Friday, Sandra.
Not so much.
It feels like to me.
A lot going on. We have a jam-packed show coming up, by the way, to cover all these stories for you this morning. First, we're going to speak with Alan Dershowitz. He will respond to the latest coming from the Robert Mueller investigation. He, of course, is expected to release new details on Michael Cohen, as well as Paul Manafort, which you just heard from Catherine Herridge there on Capitol Hill. Also, next hour, Newt Gingrich will join us. He is our headliner this morning. Expect that he's got a lot to say on all of that as well.
No question. Yeah, is that it? Is that all you got?
Yeah, that's all we got. Friday morning here.
11 minutes past. Let's go to this now. Fox's alert now. Breaking news. Some of the big stories today. A police officer in Georgia now in critical condition, confronting a suspect in Atlanta. What we're learning about that confrontation in a moment coming up here.
Plus, first came devastating wildfires. Now massive mudslides and flooding plaguing parts of California. What authorities are telling people whose homes and lives are in the path of danger.
Also, the Oscars have lost their host, Kevin Hart, quitting overnight as the host only 2 days after getting that post, while the comedian is being forced to step down. That's coming up next.
This is not the first time this has come up. I've addressed it. I've spoken on it. I've said where the rights and wrongs were. I've said who I am now versus who I was then. I've done it. I've done it.
Fox News alert, a Georgia police officer fighting for his life today. Officer Michael Smith shot in the face while struggling with a suspect. This happening yesterday just outside of Atlanta. Officer Smith was responding to a reported disturbance in a dentist's office, reportedly tased the suspect, but it didn't work. In the struggle, his gun went off. A single bullet killed the suspect and struck Smith in the face. The community there is pulling for him this morning.
15 past now. Two big deadlines now for Bob Mueller's team. The special counsel set to release details on two separate cases on Russia. Number one, the sentencing memo for Michael Cohen due by 5 o'clock today. Mueller facing another deadline. Will he file new documents that lay out an argument to try Paul Manafort yet again for violations of his plea deal? We need a law degree for all this. Oh, wouldn't you know it? Here's Alan Dershowitz, author of the book, The Case Against Impeaching Trump. And Professor, welcome back here. So much to watch today. Just sort through it, make it simple. What's important to you, sir?
Well, what's important is what the government, Mueller, essentially, and the Southern District say in their sentencing memorandum. How much will they reveal about Cohen's cooperation? You know, it's so ironic. People complain all the time that President Trump may have dangled pardons in front of people, and that constitutes tampering with witnesses and bribery. Think of what the government does every day, what prosecutors do every day. They literally bribe witnesses by their freedom, sometimes their life, and their money. In fact, about 15 years ago, a court of appeals had the courage finally to say, look, the bribery statute says anyone who offers anything of value to a witness, and therefore when the government offers less time in prison to a witness in order to get their testimony, that constitutes bribery. Of course, it was reversed later by a higher court, but the disproportionality between the power of prosecutors and the power of defense attorneys to influence the testimony of witnesses by offering them enormous amounts of valuable assets, life, liberty, money, whereas if the defense even suggests for a moment a benefit from testifying truthfully for them, that's called tampering with a witness or obstruction. So we'll see what the government is offering and what they're getting in return from Cohen. I think the same thing is true with Manafort. Look, it may be too late for Manafort to flip back, but we'll learn that probably later today.
It's been well established you've got a lot of issues with the special counsel law to begin with. However, it is what it is, so we're trying to sort through this as we go. Now, this is a difficult question to answer. What do you think we know by the end of this day today as it relates to the Russia matter?
Well, I think, first of all, we know whether Manafort is flipped back. Remember, he first didn't want to cooperate, then he decided to cooperate, then the special prosecutor said he didn't cooperate enough. Now his lawyers are in court, and the question is, will he now say, sorry, but I will continue to cooperate, and will the special counsel accept that cooperation, or will he say, no, 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 you've made your bed, we're now treating you as a hostile, adverse witness, and we're going to either try you again or recommend maximum sentence. We'll probably learn that today. Okay. We'll also learn whether or not Cohen, what the nature of his cooperation is, and how valuable it may be to Mueller.
Okay, interesting stuff. I'm taking notes as you talk, so is Sandra as well. Now, with regard to collusion, the White House team would argue, what in the world does this have to do with the collusion? Perhaps it's got nothing to do with collusion. But does it even matter anymore, Professor?
Well, you know, there is the evidence that Cohen is apparently willing to offer, and others apparently willing to offer, perhaps, that the president and his legal team or his economic team were considering building a tower in Moscow. Even if that were true, that might suggest some kind of collusion, but collusion is not a crime. And even if he was building a tower, what's the evidence that he gave anything in return for that? So unless they can prove a lot more than economic deals or meetings in the Trump Tower, they're not crossing the line from what some people might regard as political sin to federal crime. And that's what I think has been lacking up to now. They've gotten a lot of perjury, a lot of lying, a lot of indictments based on financial misconduct prior to the presidencies. But we haven't seen very much about Americans having improper dealings with the Russians. We've seen indictments against the Russians, but those are moot. Nobody's going to bring the Russians to America for trial.
I have 30 seconds. I'm going to get an answer on this Flynn memo that was filed the other day on Tuesday. This is page 2. Our viewers can see the redactions on the memo. Don't know what's behind the redactions. This is page 4. What could possibly be in the wording behind on this, sir?
Because they threatened not only prosecuting him, but prosecuting his son, he flipped and he pleaded guilty, and now apparently he's cooperating, and that's why the government is not seeking prison time for him. Again, that's just a perfect example of how much power the government has to influence witnesses to tell the stories they want to hear, as Judge Ellis put it, not only to sing, but sometimes even to compose. So those redactions may contain information about that.
Thank you, sir. Alan Dershowitz, good to have you on our program today. Thank you.
Well, the stock market opening just minutes from now following another wild ride on Wall Street yesterday. Will the new jobs numbers and trade talk fears have an effect on the markets when they open just a couple minutes from now? Maria Bartiromo will join us live next on that. Plus, President Trump issuing a new warning about our southern border, putting one particular state on high alert.
25 past to Capitol Hill we go. James Comey, now the former FBI director, is on the Hill. He meets with House and Democratic lawmakers from the Judiciary Committee behind closed doors of keen interest to Republicans. How did Comey handle the case involving Hillary Clinton and classified information? This goes back to the summer of 2016 when he announced in July of that year that Clinton would not be charged, however, saying that she was, quote, extremely careless with classified material. Pause.
Director Comey, do you stand by the decisions you made in 2016 on the Clinton campaign and the Trump investigation? Director Comey, will you take some questions? Good morning. Director Comey, do you stand by the decisions you made during the 2016 presidential campaign?
I believe that's the voice of Catherine Herridge in the hallway bouncing off the marble walls. There were questions as to how Comey dealt with the Clinton case and whether or not he revealed potential bias that is of keen interest to people like Trey Gowdy and others. Bob Goodlatte on that House Judiciary Committee. So we're watching that. The testimony starts at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. James Comey is now on the Hill. 26 past the hour now.
Now to this, the new jobs report. It is out for the month of November. Highly anticipated report showing U.S. employers added 155,000 jobs in the latest month, while the unemployment rate did remain steady at 3.7%. All of this as U.S. and China trade talks have roiled the stock market. Maria Bartiromo is the anchor of Sunday Morning Futures and Mornings with Maria and we can see you every weekday morning. We watched you all morning. A lot of breaking news, Maria, and a lot of folks trying to figure out what is happening with the U.S. stock market. Right now, it looks like there's going to be a higher open on Wall Street, Maria, despite this jobs report being a miss. What are you seeing?
A lot's going on, Sandra. Basically, what you have here is a report that's not too hot, not too cold. Look, I don't see how you don't like this report, okay? 155,000 jobs were created in the month of November. Yes, it was a little lighter than expected. We were expecting 200,000. We got 155. So, yes, it was a little lighter. But it also is right in the sweet spot of showing growth in jobs, but at the same time not too hot that it's going to trigger the Federal Reserve to go overboard raising interest rates. And I think therein lies the issue with the stock market that you just bring up. The numbers for the jobs are okay. 155,000 jobs for the month of November. Get this. You also had wages up, year-over-year wage growth matching the prior month 3.1% pace. That's the best rate since 2009. So while you are seeing job creation, you're also seeing wages go up for workers, which is very good. And what we saw happen as soon as those numbers hit, the market reversed course. We were expecting a lower opening for the broader averages today because of all of that nervousness over yesterday's activity when you had the CFO of Huawei get arrested. People were thinking, okay, the U.S.-China relationship is worsening. Let's sell this market. But when the jobs numbers came out, things reversed, and now we're seeing a gain in the market because investors are surmising this means the Federal Reserve can take its time. Maybe we're going to see a rate hike at the next meeting. That's December 17th in just a week and a half. But next year, it's anybody's guess. We were expecting 3 rate hikes from the Fed, but now as things begin to cool a bit, maybe it's 2. The market likes that. So that's why you're seeing a bit of a bounce this morning in stocks.
Fascinating, Maria. And as far as you referenced back to the Huawei CFO, her extradition order, we learned through Peter Navarro last night on Fox Business that this was an independent act by the DOJ. There was questions about whether or not the president knew about this beforehand or not. We continue to learn a lot more there, but it's fueling a lot of uncertainty about the U.S.-China relationship and an actual trade deal getting done. What is the latest there, Maria?
Well, one of the issues here, Sandra, is espionage. Look, the president may not have known that they were arresting her when they arrested her. He was at dinner with President Xi in Argentina, as you know. Maybe he didn't know exactly the specifics of that they were about to arrest her. But no doubt, of course, the president understands the situation around Huawei and ZTE, by the way, 2 major telecom companies out of China. And as the Wall Street Journal reported yesterday, the issue here is that the Chinese government has used these Chinese companies as tools to spy on foreigners, including America. So there's an espionage element here. So the president is well aware of the spying coming out of China, well aware of the fact that China has been, stealing our intellectual property for decades, well aware of the fact that they're forcing American companies who want a foothold in China to transfer their technology to their Chinese counterparts so that then the Chinese companies can come back and beat us at our own game, and also well aware of the fact that China has been unwilling to open up its markets to American companies who want to get a piece of that 1.4 billion person population. China has been unwilling to do so. You have to look at that arrest yesterday as more evidence that this president is not backing down when it comes to China.
Interesting stuff. And you sound cautiously optimistic, as you have been, Maria. We're looking at markets opened 30 seconds ago to the downside, down 68 points. What a wild ride it was on Wall Street yesterday. Maria Bartiromo joining us from Washington, D.C. this morning. Maria, thank you. And there you have it, Bill. What a day yesterday was.
Oh, my gosh, what a week.
Fell 500, then 600. Yeah. Everybody said, where is this market going? And then it clawed back at the end of the session, and the NASDAQ even finished higher on the day. So who knows?
We were doing the math together. I think it was 1,200 points in 2 days. I mean,
It was something. So we'll see how today goes. 1 minute in, Dow is down.
Maybe we need some more eggnog to get us through the week. It's just an idea. 31 past, James Comey's on the Hill. We saw that a moment ago live here on America's Newsroom. In a moment, he sits down with House lawmakers, and they're going to have a lot of questions. This could go deep into the day, possibly into the evening. A lot of unanswered questions. Governor Mike Huckabee is going to take that up in a moment, live with the governor, coming up right here next.
We've got some breaking news for you right now on some big personnel changes happening at the White House. William Barr, we are just learning, will be nominated to be the Attorney General. And Heather Nauert, formerly of this network, Fox News, will be nominated to the UN Ambassador. Let's bring in former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee. He joins us now. Governor, I report that to you as the president right now is speaking to reporters as he's departing the White House. We will have that video for you shortly. And when we do, we will play that back. But meantime, we are learning this he is making certain now. Your thoughts on William Barr first, the former AG.
Well, it's somewhat of a surprise appointment. I mean, even though it's been rumored, and the surprise is that he dates back to George Herbert Walker Bush's days as AG there. But in a way, it's a very smart choice because it's going to be much more difficult for people to say that William Barr is a political hack, that he is somehow attached to the Trump organization or the Trump machine, or that he's, somebody who is closely tied to Donald Trump, because he simply is not. In fact, if anything, he's tied to the Republican establishment way more so than to President Trump. The president may have to justify the appointment to some of his more, let's say, stringent maybe supporters. But it's a smart choice, and one that should be able to go through the Senate without the trouble that maybe a closer ally would be.
And just a little bit of background there. William Barr, 68 years old, a well-respected Republican lawyer, served as Attorney General from 1991 to 1993, as you mentioned, under President George H.W. Bush. And we had heard reports leading up to this that he had emerged as the favorite among a number of Trump administration officials, but now it is becoming official. So we'll learn more there. Next, Heather Nauert for UN Ambassador, Governor.
This has been rumored for quite some time. I mean, the challenge that Heather has is getting through the Senate confirmation, largely because even though we love her, know her well, and think the world of her, without the kind of foreign policy experience that maybe normally would be in that position, even though Nikki Haley didn't have foreign policy experience per se, I'm sure she's going to face a real grilling at the U.S. Senate. It is not something I would wish upon an enemy, much less a friend, and I consider Heather a friend, and I wish her well and hope she maybe gets for Christmas an armor suit. She may need it.
Fascinating. So again, the president is responding to reporters outside the White House, and we will have all his responses for you in just a few moments. But as far as the president's picks here and the changes in personnel, obviously this coming at a very key time in President Trump's presidency, Governor Huckabee. If you could sort of just shed some light on what you've seen so far as far as what the president is looking for members of his team and how he goes about this as we await his formal announcement here.
Well, the two things the president needs in anyone he hires, appoints, or selects for anything, two virtues that are almost impossible to find in politics anymore. One is a sense of loyalty, and the other is confidentiality. By loyalty, I don't mean blind loyalty no matter what. I mean loyalty to the man. You don't leak. You don't go out and undermine your own president. You're loyal to him, and if you can't be, you leave. And the second thing is confidentiality. Know how to keep your mouth shut. I've often said people who know don't talk, people who talk don't know. There are a lot of leakers in that White House, and I hope he gets rid of them all. The other fact is, it's natural that after 2 years, a lot of people start leaving, and it's not because they don't like the president or like the policies of the direction. They're worn out. Truth is, nobody can keep up with President Trump. He may be 72 years old, but he's got the vigor of somebody who's about 32, and he outworks everybody around him, and he has extraordinary exacting standards for what he wants. His hours are such that people just can't keep them.
It's a busy morning, and so we expect the president's formal announcement shortly. And by the way, James Comey behind closed doors with members of Congress right now. It's a busy Friday morning. We thank you for coming on, Governor Huckabee.
Great to see you, Sandra.
You too. We will continue this discussion. By the way, later in the show, former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, will join us live right here in America's Newsroom as our headliner this morning.
Looking forward to that. Meanwhile, from overseas, watch this over the weekend. The iconic Eiffel Tower is closed tomorrow. Police tightening security around tourist attractions in an attempt to prevent more of this. Demonstrations and protests, students joining the Yellow Vests on anti-government matters. Senior foreign affairs correspondent Greg Palkot. Great looking backdrop in Paris. What's going to happen, Greg? Hello.
Bill, it is a cold, windy day here in Paris today. It could get a whole lot hotter tomorrow. Trouble is threatened. As we drove in here, we saw windows being boarded up, metal gratings that could be used as projectiles being taken away, shops, restaurants, banks, landmarks, you name it, all getting ready to be shut down tomorrow. Some 89,000 police are being mobilized nationwide, try to head off some of the damage that was seen here last Saturday. 2 people were killed, 130 were injured, 400 were arrested. Authorities are saying flatly there will be more extreme violence, their words, tomorrow. It's all part of the so-called Yellow Vest protest named after the high visibility jackets that French drivers have to have in their cars, and is triggered by a hike in the price of diesel fuel by the government here, they say, to try to combat global warming. But it's turned into a broader protest about high taxes, low wages, and a government thought to be out of touch with the people. And that means French President Emmanuel Macron, he was voted in last year as a new style reformer, but it is thought that much of what he has done so far has benefited the rich at the expense of the poor. And yes, it is spreading. All this week, we've seen students staging their own protests. Images of kids being lined up like criminals outside of their high school outside of Paris has gone viral. Other scenes showing rough treatment by the authorities also getting the attention. Bill, the government has already given ground on some aspects of the complaints coming from the protesters. The Prime Minister of France.
One of the most bewildering parts of our current moment, and there are many, is watching the American left become the mirror image of what it once was not so long ago. Do you remember when liberals supported free speech and due process? When the ACLU had principles? Remember when they sided with wage earners over billionaires when they kind of cared about you or pretended to? Seems like about 100 years ago. Liberals also, by the way, used to care about the environment, not the politicized abstract stuff like climate policy, but the actual physical environment of America, our land and our water and our trees, even our sidewalks. Liberals were worried about mass immigration and overpopulation then. They didn't want to live in a crowded, dirty country. Well, after a whole lot of searching, we have located the last liberal in America who feels that way. We'll talk to him in just a minute. But first tonight, speaking of liberals, they are thrilled by the Mueller investigation these days. It seems like all upside to them. Their political opponents are being harassed day and night. Some of them may soon be indicted. The administration can barely govern with all the noise about Russia. Now, Robert Mueller is said to be a Republican. They always tell us that. But in effect, Mueller is doing the heavy lifting of the Democratic Party. If you're a progressive who hates Donald Trump, this is like Christmas every single day. Or is it? Writer T.A. Frank has his doubts about that. Frank is no right-winger. He doesn't like Donald Trump, actually. But he's thought this through carefully. In an insightful piece for Vanity Fair, Frank wonders if liberals will look back on this moment and consider the Mueller investigation worth doing. In response to criticism from the left, for example, Frank notes, quote, Trump's White House has pursued what is arguably the harshest set of policies toward Russia since the fall of communism. That's hardly something to celebrate. Yet nearly all of the pressure from the center left, as much as from the right, is toward making it even tougher on Russia. So the question is it really wise to risk war with a nuclear-armed power solely for short-term partisan political advantage? Is that a precedent you want to set, Frank wonders. And then this, which ought to be printed and taped to the fridge in the kitchen of every political consultant on the Democratic side in Washington. Here it is, quote, the weapons you create for your side today will be used by the other side against you tomorrow. Do we really want the special counsel investigation to become a staple of presidential life? It's a creation with few boundaries on scope and a setup that encourages the selection of a suspect followed by a search for the crime rather than the other way around. Well, that's a good point. Democrats are now telling us that Robert Mueller is somehow above the reach of government. Any executive branch oversight of his investigation qualifies, they tell us, as an impeachable offense. In their view, Mueller is something like a God prosecutor, accountable only to himself. But the question is, will Democrats be comfortable with that standard when the next independent counsel investigates the next Democratic president? And more to the point, whatever happened to representative government? Shouldn't all federal employees answer to elected officials who in turn answer to voters? That's what representative government is. Well, not anymore. In the name of defending democracy, the left is weakening democracy. Democrats don't seem to understand that now. They're having too much fun watching their enemies suffer. But they will understand it, and likely they'll deeply regret it. Robin Biro is a former Obama campaign regional director. He joins us tonight. Robin, thanks a lot for coming on.
Thank you, Tucker.
First to the Russia question, I would never argue that Russia is our friend. I think, they don't seek our best, and I think they've undertaken a lot of mischief at our expense over the years. In the last election, probably one example of it. But the idea that Russia is our primary geopolitical adversary is like insane. It's untrue. That, of course, would be China. No one disagrees with that. And so doesn't this whole investigation amount to, in effect, a lie to the American people about the threats we really face?
You know, Tucker, I look at this from the standpoint, I'm a veteran. Yes. A Spec Ops veteran. And I look at this as protecting our democracy. The sole intent of this was to look at foreign influence in our electoral process. Right. That really shouldn't be a partisan issue. I think that as patriotic Americans, and I think that we both are, and most of the viewers are, I'm sure, we support federal law enforcement and want to make sure that they are not adversely affecting our electoral process.
But I wonder, though, look, like a lot of things, I don't disagree with what you say in theory, but I wonder if we're not undermining democracy in its defense. So here you have a special counsel who Democrats are telling us is not accountable to any branch of government. The executive branch run by Trump can't rein him in because that would be an impeachable offense, and Congress has no authority because he's an executive branch employee, technically. So that's not a democratic system where you have someone with the power to destroy your life and put you in prison who can't be accountable to anybody elected by voters. That's the opposite of democracy, is it not?
You know, I looked at the appointment memo for Robert Mueller in this investigation, and it gives him the authority to look into any matters that may arise directly from the investigation. So that's pretty broad. And to your question about whether or not this could come back on Democrats, yes, it could. I remind you that the Flynn memo that just came out this week pretty much showed us that there are 2 other criminal investigations. Those could very well be against Democrats. Those could come back to haunt us. For sure.
Okay, so
yes, the weapons that we use
you're
now
absolutely right,
could
of course,
come back to haunt us.
But may I get to a more fundamental question?
I wouldn't be surprised.
Since you're for democracy, I'm for democracy, then let's just agree on the terms here. Every employee of a government in democracy must answer by definition to an elected official because the voters are in control, the power resides with them, correct?
Yes.
What elected official does Robert Mueller answer to?
I don't know exactly how the DOJ works, but I do support federal law enforcement. Ultimately, the man at the top of the DOJ. Hold on.
Look, I don't mean to be a stickler on the cynics thing,
is President Trump.
As long as we're defending democracy, let's defend democracy. And democracy is predicated on the idea that people rule, and they rule through their elected representatives in our version of democracy. So
and I look at this as protecting our to haunt us.
But may I get to a more fundamental question?
I wouldn't be surprised.
Since you're for democracy, I'm for democracy, then let's just agree on the terms here. Every employee of a government in democracy must answer by definition to an elected official because the voters are in control, the power resides with them, correct?
Yes.
What elected official does Robert Mueller answer to?
I don't know exactly how the DOJ works, but I do support federal law enforcement. Ultimately, the man at the top of the DOJ. Hold on.
Look, I don't mean to be a stickler on the cynics thing, but hold on. As long as we're defending democracy, let's defend democracy. And democracy is predicated on the idea that people rule, and they rule through their elected representatives in our version of democracy. So if he is working for us, if he's a federal employee, which he is, which elected representative can fire him? Which elected representative does he answer to? How are we safer for that? Does that make you feel safer? It doesn't make me feel safer.
as far as protecting our democracy and protecting against cyber warfare, it's a real problem in this day and age. And we saw all of those intelligence agencies, the U.S. intelligence agencies, come out clearly and say that this was a problem. This actually did happen.
Right.
President Trump has kind of been waffling on whether or not he believes U.S. intelligence.
And I do. I can't help it. And I hear them say again and again that Trump cannot fire or rein in a federal employee. He doesn't have the authority to do that. Now, that seems to me, that's a pretty clear argument. No role in this. Their elected representatives are powerless to sit. Elected by nobody do